Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to our SCM Fire Chat. Today being one of our series with some to follow, SCM Back to Basics, First Principles, as today in this new century we call them, it's First Principles. So welcome, my name is Sibongile Shongwe, co-founder of NS Business School. I'm with my partner who would introduce herself just now. Phumzile.
Morning, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Phumzile Njogo. As Phumzile has already indicated, I am also a co-founder for NS Business School. So NS Business School really is about, our main focus is on leadership, supply chain management leadership specifically, as well as leadership in the entrepreneurial space. Okay, so thank you for joining us today. We will be really talking about, as Sibongile has indicated, supply chain management as an intro to the series that we're going to be having, really just breaking down what supply chain management is about, demystifying some of the understanding or lack thereof of what supply chain management is to business or to in the entrepreneurial space. And then as we go along in the next 3 or 4 weeks, we will then be taking a particular theme in turn, right? So thank you so much. We'll hand it over to you, Sibongile, to kick us off.
Thank you. We just felt that it was quite important for us to really, talk through what the vision behind the NS Business School is, of which you will see as we go along. And even with this series of the Back to Basics, First Principles, SCM Fire Chats, you'll see why. And I think perhaps at the end of the this webinar, you'll also understand why NS Business School was formed. So basically, we thought that looking at the SCM space currently at our profession, which I call, as you see now, as we post from NS Business School, we call it an art, because I think we need to normalize that SCM is an art. So if we look at now where we find ourselves at, the situation, the current state of SCM, be it in the public sector, or private sector, but it's rife more in the public sector because, as you know, the public sector, the stakeholders are who it's the citizens of the country. So that's where you will see it. But as we do research, and Phumzile will allude to that, we find that it is the same. And it's not only in South Africa, but it's across the globe. So this is what we are finding, particularly with this art of ours or profession. So why do we find ourselves in the state that we are in currently? And why do we talk about back to basics or the first principles? We know that first principles or back to basics, it means that we need to go back. We need to break it down, for example, into pieces that we can understand, go back and see what has gone wrong or what is wrong or why is this not going where we want it to go. Because if you look at it, I mean, from the 80s, we have been hearing SCM, we have been hearing procurement, where we've been, this function has been in evolution. It has been developing for some time now. If you look at the past 30 years or past 40s, we can see that we are growing, but we are still, it's a profession that it's not actually, there's no consensus if you look at it. Why do we find ourselves as practitioners? What we've seen, having been a practitioner as well, we see that actually, we are frustrated when we practice in this function of ours. Everybody knows how to do our function, believe me, and they can do it. But when the popo hits the fan, nobody is, or nobody is there, or people do not know. Or when, for example, things don't go right, people don't come forward. We, as the practitioners, are the ones who actually have to come forward and explain things and stuff. I agree that yes, everybody can buy, but now when you put in an organization and the spend, it becomes different. When you go and buy for your own house, you buy furniture, you buy your clothes, you buy groceries. There's not much thought on it other than you plan that I'm going to buy, or budget or put money aside that I'm going to buy, or making a list that I'm going to buy this grocery, or maybe shopping to say I'm looking for these couches. But then when you have millions and billions for you to buy, and for, which actually affects operations, which actually affects the organization, then it becomes different. We will agree. I think we are talking here to the converted, those who understand, but this is meant to also educate those who do not know where we are at. Why do we talk about this function? Why are we making these notes? Why are we making submissions? So what is happening in this space of ours? And I think we know what is happening. But do we have, I think maybe perhaps the people, Phumzile will touch on the leadership aspect, because it's her forte and specialty. But why do we have these issues in our space? Why are we not? Who is supposed to actually take up this and move forward? How do we change this narrative that we are at? So we thought that going back to basics, didn't understand that. Going back to basics will assist us.
I think someone is it Maji? Is he on the phone?
I will mute. I've muted him.
Okay, thanks.
So, sorry about that. So this is what we are saying. What needs to happen in this space? Because yes, there are submissions we are writing, as you can see, even with National Treasury as well. There is now the bill, the procurement bill that has been issued to go out around for us to comment. And now we have seen as well with the preferential regulation. This is not an easy space as people think it is, or they make it out to be. So if you look at now the regulations, for example, look at the courts, look at what is happening. And now we are thrown into, again, a space of confusion. We don't know what needs to happen. Now, even, you can see from National Treasury, the minister issued these regulations, but on whose advice as well? Did we look at what the impact would be as well? So this is what we're saying. Let's really look at the back to basics. Let's look at where does this profession come from, so we can break it down, so we can put it out there, go back to basic and see what needs to be done and how it needs to be done, so that we can correct, perhaps if there are anything that needs to be corrected, or so that we can influence the changes, be it from academia, be it from practice, be it from a holistic point of view, organizational point of view. So we need to look at that. So right now, as we break it down, we are looking at, for example, just breaking it down, going back to basics. But what does it mean? So now, right now, we're talking, what does it mean to go back to basics in the supply chain space or concept? So I would like us to talk about first the evolution, perhaps just a little bit, because we will not go and touch all of it. We can just start by talking about the evolution, which I will hand over to Phumzile to just start on the evolution, and then perhaps I will close it out in that aspect, in terms of where we're coming from and maybe why we find ourselves here and how do we break it down. Okay, Phumzile, maybe you can come in there and just tell us, what do you think in terms of evolution in relation to back to basics?
Well, I think when we're talking about supply chain and to the point that you have put forward, Uguti, we're finding ourselves unable to leverage as organizations, to leverage a supply chain effectively. We are unable to draw the strengths that a supply chain is supposed to add for our businesses, or for whether it's a big organization, whether it's a small organization. Supply chain is a backbone of how we do business. But if we don't know what the supply chain management function is supposed to do, or what it is, or or if we haven't clearly crystallized that particular element, that's why we're finding ourselves with so much convolution, so much confusion in our spaces. So supply chain management has been called many names. It's not understood even by us in certain instances as supply chain management practitioners, whether we are in public, whether we are in the private sector. Mainly because supply chain management was a profession that, or it was a discipline, let me put it like that. It was a discipline really that was, you can find most part of it in the engineering space, you can find part of it in the operations, you can find part of it in many areas of the business. So as we are moving along, as we are redefining it, we are trying to pull these elements that are placed in many areas of the business into one. And so as you can see, it started as it was just called purchasing, and then people are saying now it's procurement, and now we are saying no, it's actually a supply chain management because it's the value chain. If you want to make it effective, you need to be able to consolidate all these elements across the value chain. So it keeps on evolving, and we keep on re-identifying it. But we need to also be very wary as supply chain practitioners, as leaders, that the fact of the matter remains that supply chain management function is still not a consolidated discipline. That's why, as you said, you will find that everyone in the business keeps on saying, in progress. It keeps on saying, we can do supply chain, we can do procurement, anyone can do it. I have found in many instances over the more than 20 years that I've got in the supply chain management space, you'll find that supply chain management in certain areas was reporting to HR, in certain areas was reporting to the legal department, in certain spaces is reporting to finance. That on its own tells you that we still don't have a consolidated understanding, one understanding of what supply chain management is all about. And that is the fact. That is a fact. So as a first step, we need to go back as any organization to say, because I always say supply chain management is such a vast and dynamic discipline, and it can take many forms of, and that form is informed by what the business or organization is looking for that supply chain management function to deliver. Yeah. If you want a supply chain management function to deliver at a rudimentary level, we just want you guys to buy. We just want you guys to make sure the triple R's are effected. Then that supply chain can take that mode. It can take that shape. But we then need to know this is how much we can get out of it. Other organizations are saying, no, but we want a supply chain management function that is able to look across, that is able to look from the manufacturing side until that product gets to the end user. And we need it to be that strategic. Then if this is the supply chain that an organization is looking for, then the conversations are different, because then we start bringing in many other areas that are strategic in thinking, are strategic in how we position ourselves, strategic in how even the skills that we deploy within the supply chain management function, right? And then as we start having those clarified conversations, we start having a clearer view of where the roles and where the responsibilities lie, because that's where, as you have said in the beginning, when things happen and when the popo hits the fan, in many instances, there is always a cross pointing of fingers. This is your fault, it's that fault, because we have not received or have not reached that consensus as a business that this is the supply chain that we want. This is how we're going to position it. And as a result, these are the expectations we have from you guys. If we have these expectations, we're going to hold you to account at this particular level. Why am I saying that? If, as an organization, you are saying we want a supply chain management function that can perform at a rudimentary level, you cannot hold it to account at a strategic level, because you will have invested the skills, you would have invested the systems, processes at a rudimentary level. So therefore, you cannot be expecting that function to be answerable for strategic elements, high level, complex issues in the business. You know what I mean? And that's why it is, to me, that is the crux of where we are as a supply chain management organization. And it's one of the areas that is killing the momentum, the efficiencies, and it is one of the areas that is creating so many, even the findings that we have when we've got audits. If you can look also at the outcomes that have come out of the Zondo Commission, etc., they all lead back to a supply chain management effort here, as an organization. What does it look like? What is being held? What is that function held to account for? One last thing, and we need to be real as supply chain practitioners ourselves. We need to be real so that we start addressing the real issues. We start solidifying our voice, because that's one of the areas we are lacking in. Our voice is supply chain. We know the space, we know the issues, but we don't have a solid voice that we are speaking about. We all know, again, going back into where we come from, is supply chain management, where it was still called purchasing functions. It was really the skills that are there were people that, when they were not performing in another function, for example, they would be saying, what do we do with you? Go to purchasing. That is the legacy that we have currently right now. So that's why I'm saying, if we're saying we now want to get our our supply chain management to a strategic level to evolve, we also need to look at the skills. That is the main reason, one of the reasons why NS Business School has come into the space to say we have a big gap here in supply chain management skills development. How do we start upskilling the function so that it reaches and it's able to talk or align to the strategic goals of the business?
Yeah, okay. So I think you bring an important aspect there as well of skills, because if you say we need to talk real, I think also as leaders in the space, we that's required to come out as well from us and be real about it. So because if we have skills that do not function as well, skills is one of the things or areas that I say it has led us to where we are at right now, where we find ourselves, in this crisis mode that we are in. If you look at the state capture, for example, what happened, some of these things couldn't have happened if we as supply chain professionals, for example, we are, licensed to operate, because you know what it means, what your actions will result into. You will not. You rather would actually go to a certain, point where you will be protected, for example, if you raise issues. But because there wasn't, these other things crept into our space and they happened today. So the reputation will not actually, that is why our reputation is a function that is not respected. And we always say as professionals in the space, it's a thankless job. No job should be a thankless job. Yes, complaints can be there, or yes, fingers can be pointed, but we need actually to change, I think, this landscape. It's all up to us. As you know, as we discuss, as we write these blogs, we do look internally towards ourselves. So yes, I agree. For me to say, as supply chain, when it started, if you go to others, Pumzile, they will tell you that it started, with logistics. In the World War I, World War II, that's where it started. And then there was the era of industrialization, machinery. There was an era where, there was just production, an area of production only, the end user, the recipient or the customer was not thought of. And then it went where it was sales, it was in sales, now sales and marketing were in there. So it's a function that just has been moved. It was moving around purchasing. And yes, if you look at the definition You know, I was reading the other day, there are over 55 million definitions of purchasing, procurement, supply, or supply chain management. So there's supply management, there's supply chain management, there's procurement, there's buying, there's sourcing. So all these are called one thing. In other organizations, you'll find there's sourcing. In others, you'll find there's something else, there's category. So there's no one consensus of saying, as this is an art or is a discipline, what is it? And understanding. So some are saying purchasing, but now as academias and I think people in practice are starting to write, it's now limited to, now we're talking not limited, but we're talking mostly about purchasing, as you've said, Phumzile. We're talking about procurement, and then either supply management, supply chain management. So we do have this fine. But your purchasing, if you recall, it were when we were talking about, you know, when you started to come into this space, we were hearing that buying at the right time, right place, right quality, quantity.
The 5 R's.
Yes, that was all that it was about, just those. But now, if you look at procurement, even with SIPs, how they define it, procurement now, it's more the strategic part, which includes, I think, your sourcing, your strategic sourcing, because your negotiations, contracting and stuff. And then there's this umbrella that we love, why we saying it should be called supply chain management, because this is an umbrella that looks at, you know, the management's ability to align, to coordinate, to integrate and synchronize all these activities in the physical, information, monetary flows, you know, in the supply chain, because it includes, it's even cross-functional. That's how important it is. And for us, and as NS Business School, is that we want to look at it from that point of view, because it is encompassing, is an umbrella. Within supply chain management, it includes all those related issues, all those. You'll have that purchasing, which is tactical. You'll have the procurement, which is that. And then also on the supply chain management, then you have everything else, because it includes your demand management, as we know. So this back to basics that we're looking at, we're saying, let's break it down. Let's go to the basics. And for us, we are saying basics means what? You know, what do we say? What do we understand? What is it? So we know that we go to school. For me, I like to include academia, because I think they have quite an influence in terms of how a profession is recognized or is deemed a profession or an art. But what do they teach, Phumzile? What I like to say, what do they teach? You know, is that curricula enough? I don't know. In your view, I know you've done an assessment in terms of the curriculum. What do you think, for, you know, as a person who starts from school and go to university and study and go and be placed in and say, now I'm looking for a job, having viewed, you know, the curricula across, what's your view in terms of the curricula and its space in the back to basics, as we are trying to focus here?
I think academia, it's a very important element in helping us consolidate the definition of supply chain management, and what it actually means for business. In the research that we really have conducted, the academia, it's also fragmented. It also pulls it in different directions. For example, you are saying that it comes, you know, in certain quarters. It's understood that the supply chain management it's first started as logistics in the World War I or World War II, etc. In certain other spaces, it says, but procurement was the very first one, when even in the old days when the pyramids were built. And acquisition of the material, and think of how old those pyramids are. So I actually don't believe there's one area or one space where we can say it started here. I think we need to take all those different areas and pull them together in us then coming up with one identity. Because at the end of the day, supply chain management as a value chain, it includes procurement, it includes logistics, it includes selling it and getting it to downstream to the client. So we cannot run away from the fact that if we are saying supply chain management, it means it's the end-to-end value chain. Within that end-to-end value chain, there are 4 big blocks, or there are 5 big blocks, which might be procurement, logistics, etc., etc. So academia, I think, has a major role to play in assisting us to be able to consolidate. And I keep on using the word consolidate because all the data and information is there. It's just spread around, and it seems like everyone is holding on to it. And no one is really trying to say we need to come together and have, while yes, there's speciality across the value chain, it's important to have a focus on each speciality, but it's just as important to consolidate this chain, to create those links and make sure that those links are very clear, are easily understood. Mm-hmm. Coming back to the point of academia and practice, that is also then another gap that we have found. When we go to school and we study a supply chain management related qualification, when we go then back to the working environment, there's a huge gap. And I'm saying this because I have undertaken a mentoring, coaching, leg of within the practice to say we are finding students that are coming in that are not work ready, and the gap is so big. So there's this gap in between that we now need to fill to get them work ready, because the qualification itself is not adequate enough to get these graduates work ready. And I think that's then it almost takes us then into the next era that we wanted to speak to, which is the professionalization. Because if you look at becoming a doctor, or if you look at becoming a lawyer, if you look at becoming an accountant, a CA, you do a pure academic or theory element in your studies, and then there's a gap that is closed by your 3-year internship, where a CA will go into an accounting firm to do their articles, where a doctor will go into local hospitals or government hospitals to close that. I think they do a 3-year or so. So all the professions have identified when we come out of college or university, there's another gap that we need to close, and then to make sure that we have a holistic training of our graduates that become work ready, whether they decide to go into private practice or whether they decide to go into business. But there's a big gap there that is at the moment, it's a vacuum. It's left mostly to businesses to say, okay, here we have produced a degreed individual, you see what to finish. But the businesses don't have the time. They don't have the time, they don't have the capacity, they actually don't even have the skills to get these guys work ready. So there is the big gap there that I think academia can also assist. But academia alone can also not just do these things. They need to partner with industry players to see, as well as other interested parties, to stakeholders, to see how we can close this gap to elevate the skill in supply chain management.
So maybe Mpumi is saying here to us in the audience, SCM in most organizations is really not given a seat at the strategic level. Yet, she says, is the backbone of any organization. And unfortunately, not all organizations shares the same views. To your point that, supply chain, how it's, implemented in any organization or placed in any organization, it depends on what that organization, the, objectives, or on just basically what the organization thinks of supply chain management. So she also says, to your point, that, the curricula is not, it's just not enough. And she says she doesn't want to be negative, but what they teach is not fundamentally aligned to the realities or the work environment, more so if we zoom into the public sector. So that's what she says, because of course, yes, if you look at public admin, how it's taught at at varsities, you'll see there's public administration, and it's also it's actually focused, obviously, because it's public, it's focused on the public sector. But within supply chain, we know, and I think there is vast, research that has been done now. As you see, even when you research, you will see that there's procurement, but there is procurement in the public sector. Now we talk about supply chain, they're saying there's supply chain management in the public sector. So even though the academics, the scholars that are writing, but you do not find, even when you research in terms of the books, if you look at purchasing, you'll see it's old. You don't find a lot of relevant stuff, and you don't find stuff that actually are speaking to us as academics. So while you were touching that, I was just thinking, Uti, then how, why are we surprised? I don't know if you're talking about these skills that people have just taken, for example, and put in practice to say, here is your space, run, you will just have to run. Unfortunately, it's a plug and play. But if you look at a finance, for example, there are practicals. If you look at HR, a teacher, for example, there will be, because that's the kind of discipline. But for me, I would have thought that because supply chain, we're talking about entrusting someone. I'm not, for me, in my head, even today, I'm not getting this right. Even in my household, as much as we're saying buying, you buy, do I take my 5-year-old or my 10-year-old and give him or her 5,000 and say, go and buy groceries? I have not seen that. So I don't understand how would an organization as big as the public sector, for example, or, if you look at the private sector, you just take somebody, you entrust them with your money. The money is for the organization to say, these are the funds, go and spend. You can go and buy. I'm in my head, I cannot fathom that adequate. I don't understand it, because I would have thought that you would have. I know, for example, when I used to work for Eskom, at least when you got into the procurement space or supply chain space, there were courses that were done. You would have to go and do purchasing in Eskom 1, purchasing in Eskom 2, and if you were to deal with Forex, you have to go and attend training and be accredited. You had to attain a certain level of percentage. For you, 50% didn't cut it, 70 didn't cut it, for you to be able to deal with Forex in the supply chain space. So I'm not understanding, and I think for me there are some organizations that are doing it better. But we are not learning from those organizations to see what we can do best. So for me, I'm saying, as we are seeing, I think there are themes that are coming out here as we are talking about this back to basics, to say what went wrong. So where do we go and, actually break this down so that we say to correct this, for example, what areas we need to look at. So as we also move along to say, we can see what has put us here. For example, the evolution, the taxonomy that we have, because somebody who comes in the space will come. If you look at the research that we've been doing in the government, like the national departments, you can see we're talking about provisioning. This is the public sector. They are not even at purchasing or buying or procurement. They are still talking provisioning. So I just think we need to get a critical mass, I think, for the leadership within this space. I mean, if I research on the people that we have started, when I started working in the space of supply chain, people have actually developed themselves. people have studied here. So my view is, I think, as we talk about the recommendations in terms of the back to basics, what we need to take for, so that we can go forth with this, is actually go back to the leadership within this space and the people, the practitioners that have been here for some time, that know, so that we can actually really make this work. Because we know what has happened, we can see what is happening, and we also have gained some knowledge in terms of self-development, in terms of looking in this space and say what can be done much better to improve, supply chain management according to this. So I think one of the other things that I'm throwing here and leading to one of your critical areas, Phumzile, of mentorship and critical of training, is leadership in terms of here. How did the other professions do it? Does it require leadership? And how is the leadership that we have in supply chain management? Talking, not fluffy stuff, talking the real stuff, to say, what is leadership doing? What do you think about leadership? What do we have as we are doing this research, the researches that we have? Who do we have? Do we have the right leadership, or maybe not the right leadership? What do we need in supply chain management leadership? What is it that maybe you see in your research that we may have been we may be lacking in this space, which is aligned as well, which can assist as we break down, back to basics?
Sure. Yeah. So as when we started, is supply chain management is a function that it can be very dynamic. It requires a multidisciplined type of skills within the supply chain management function to be effective. If an organization is willing and ready to extract value from their supply chain, they need to understand that we cannot just look for individuals or the skill, and we keep on touching on the skill, because that's where value is sitting. If supply chain management is now, it's not just looking at I buy, you get, I give you. You need to be able to look at, there's a huge element of customer care to ensure that we understand what our business is looking for. We need to understand where is the business looking to go. So we need to be able to then align ourselves with those types of things. We need to be able to make sure that we're talking to environmental issues. We need to understand that, internally within all the business units, marketing, legal, we need to understand what are those legal requirements when we are putting together a contract. It is not just an element where we just hand it over to legal. Legal is our we co-opt legal to help us to put together an agreement that is watertight to protect the organization as well as to protect the supplier themselves. So we have all these disciplines, all these skills that we as supply chain need to know. We need to be we need to learn how to improve our stakeholder management expertise or skills, for example. We need to be able to sit with senior people in the organization, boards within our organization, and advise them, add value in those organizations, etc. So in those spaces. So that tells you that as supply chain management, we just are not buyers. We are more than that. And we need to then start having those types of conversations. So to the point, Uguti, we are not being invited into strategic spaces. The fact of the matter is, no one is going to come and get us. No one is going to come and say, come, join us. We have seen this. We've been in these spaces for long enough. The guys that are probably part of the audience can attest to that. If you are called in, you are really just called in as a form of token to say, hey, but we did have a supply chain professional in the space. But truth be told, our voice is not strong enough. our voice is not clear enough. First of all, we need to be able to advocate for ourselves. We need to be able to lead ourselves, improve ourselves, skill ourselves in all these different disciplines. Another element of leadership is, yes, the person or the people that are on top of this supply chain management function to say these are the leaders. So this can get quite controversial because in the past we've been saying, and for us who are people who have been in this space, have been saying that, but the CFO is not strong enough or does not understand the space deep enough. As a result, we don't have a strong advocate in a CFO. We therefore need a CPO. And those are valid arguments or valid points to put across. However, they are being discussed at we are almost fearful to have those conversations, and we are waiting for other people to have those conversations for us. And it's an unfortunate space that we are in. No one is going to have these conversations for us if we do not advocate for ourselves, so that the leadership that believes that they can lead us understands where the issues lie. At the end of it, all the research that I've done, every CFO that you speak to, they will tell you, Iguti, supply chain management is the worst area that gives me sleepless nights. I can manage and I'm confident in many other areas, but see, when it comes to supply chain management, I don't have a handle of that space. And many of them that I have interviewed have indicated that I actually don't know what to do with that space.
Yeah.
So it's not so much about, are you a CFO, CEO, CPO, or whatever. It is taking out the time to understand what the issues are. Because the people that are leading us do not have a clear understanding of where the issues are. Because we are also fearful in having those robust conversations with our leaders to say this is where our issues are, and also to frame them in a way that makes sense for us. We need to start advocating for ourselves.
It's an important point there as far as leadership is concerned, because these are some of the questions that were asked if during the state capture, if this could happen, where was the CPO? I've not heard them saying, where was the CFO? The questions are, where was the CPO? And if you look deep and search further and ask within the organization and try and find where was the CPO? And you will see that some of the CPOs were suppressed, or some were suspended, or you'll be put on precautionary suspension for some time. And then some transactions will happen, or some were just there. They were like, well, it didn't come to it. It happened. As we saw from the state capture as well, Phumzile, CPOs that went, they produced, I think, evidence that this is what I've done, this is what I've said. My decisions were overturned, at board level or at EXCO level, because yes, this function, as I'm saying, it reports, as you're saying, it reports to the CFO or operations or HR. So if it's there, you are not there as the CPO to answer these questions. So whoever that is there, if they agree, the consensus is there, it doesn't matter whether what you have said, decisions will be taken there and you'll be overruled. So this unfortunately is the nature of our space, which needs to change, which has led for me to where we are at. And we also contribute as professionals to, I think, as leaders, I'm talking about leadership that you're talking about. We contribute to actually, this, I call it now a state of paralysis, because that's where we are at. So that's why we need to find, I think we need to go to rehab. I call it like rehab, to learn how to walk again, or to crawl here, or just start there, so that we can get this profession where it needs to go. So yes, leadership is quite important. As we see, this is, if it's an umbrella. Remember, if it's an umbrella, it means you talk to you need to be speaking to people at the senior levels. Therefore, you need to be placed strategically, as Mpumi was saying there. So, but if it's not that, unfortunately, anyone else, you may have as a leader, as CPO, I think the experience that is required for you may have it, you may be qualified, you may know what you need to do, but if you are unable to articulate it where it matters most, unfortunately, you cannot be heard. As we have seen as well in practice, when we're in practice, if my CFO cannot articulate, for example, what I know best, they can't. And so also, if that happens, remember, the people that are below me feels that as well. So that's what's going to happen as well with them, with their counterparts as well. So this space requires a different, because for me in business and in the public sector, I think, as well as some in the private sector, it reports to finance. And what came to me as I was reading, as I'm saying, I was trying to really understand and fathom this, is that because it involves money. So someone else thought, yeah, because it involves money, it needs to go to finance. But this is different. You know, that is why the CFO says, Mina, I don't know the hell. If you go to the curricula, you know, me and you did accounting, did CTA. So, you know, become accounting. There is nothing in the curricula of accounting that talks to supply chain management. There is nothing, unless if it has just been updated now recently. But I have not found, as I was doing my modules in accounting, where I found anything that talks to supply chain management. But in the supply chain management curricula, there is accounting, right? Because we're talking about money. So this thing is vice versa, because it includes money. That's why I'm saying we're breaking it down. We're saying it should report to finance, but in actual effect, it shouldn't. I should be, as for example, as a CPO, talk to the finance to say to the CPO to say, okay, money is spent here. This is where the organization is spending money, and this is how they're spending it. And maybe perhaps how do we help the organization in difficult situations? And obviously, we know if the organization is looking up for money, and although they go to the CFO, but CFO comes to supply chain. You see, so these are the things that I'm saying as we break down, we need to start there. We start to say, what is it? Can we have consensus to say, what is this that we're talking about? How do we define it? What is an acceptable definition of this? And then we look at the curricula. If we say you are doing a supply chain management degree, for example, we're not talking about logistics, Pumzi, because what we found as we're doing that research, you saw, when people are saying supply chain, we're talking about logistics. You go to these various institutions. What did we find? Most, if they're saying there's a supply, we'll see that it's logistics. So these are things that we need to untangle for me as I look at it. I know that we are getting now into the recommendation space and looking at the time. So this for me, as we talk as back to basics, we go there. We got the consensus, as much as there can be a taxonomy, different and 55 million definitions, but we need to say, what do we call it? Do we call it procurement? For a small business, I would say a small business will say procurement, because but for a big organization, as much as there's no manufacturing, but you have stores, which is big, you have quite a lot, you have demand management, you have quite significant, a big organization that you can look at. And you also integrate and interact with your suppliers, because, I mean, if we look at the organization and what supply chain does, this is where we need to look at. We look at importance, for example. That's what we need. We come to skills, which is important. We need to actually look at those things. If we put somebody as leader, I was saying, you know, this importance, why actually it looks like supply chain does not have a backbone, or it's not recognized, or it's not a profession that matters. You know, you cannot take someone, even if it's HR, you don't just take anyone and put them there. They will have to have gone through some steps. They'll have some qualifications that are required. They don't put them there. But in supply chain, you take somebody else who doesn't even have qualifications, you say they must lead this function of yours. And if things don't go right, we are shocked, we are surprised, which is what is happening in the country. Even now, from the higher echelons, you'll say, oh, I am shocked. In the president, they're shocked.
Everyone is always shocked.
Yes, we are always shocked, but then we the issues are there. I mean, they are glaring. So I'm saying, maybe as we wrap, I know that our audience, please post your call. We'll open up maybe another 5 minutes for you to put in, but please do put in the chat box there your contributions. But yes, we will open up maybe the probably 3 or so minutes for you to ask questions that you may want or contribute or any recommendations, because from these webinars as well, we do Phumzile, I think, write up a few papers as well. So I was talking about what do we need to do. I think Phumzile, maybe from your side as well, because I have touched on some, maybe from your side, you can just add on and contribute in terms of what you think.
So you have touched on, HR. I was looking at the history of HR, because HR also had similar issues like we have, like supply chain management has, but they have made strides in moving themselves through the ladder into being accepted as a strategic element of the business. And if you look at the history of how HR has done it, they have also they are continuously redefining themselves. Now they are calling themselves human capital management. You will find that now we have a human capital officer, not a human resources officer, and they are sitting at the strategic elements. But they have done a lot of work in defining who they are. I keep on going back to, we need to make sure our identity is very clear. What is our identity? And that goes hand in hand with how, consolidating again the roles of the entire value chain. What do we call ourselves? And what do we think we can add to the table? So I think we can take a lot of lessons on how HR has done it. Yes, we do compare ourselves sometimes to the finance profession, the engineering profession, but those guys have done the work long time ago. We can take learnings from them, but there's a lot of learnings that we can take from professions that have done this quite recently, HR being one of them. And in that, we are able to then strengthen our advocacy. Who is our advocate? Who is making the noises for us? Who is standing in the spaces for us? Who is speaking in those different spaces for us as supply chain management?
Yeah.
And to your point, we can't just have anyone. We can't just have anyone who will be able to do this. Yes, when we come to finance, I believe finance needs to say, this is what. It's the what that is being answered. Here's the money. This is what you need to spend. Procurement then defines how we spend it to bring value to the organization, to save costs, to improve efficiencies for the operation of the business not to be disturbed. To me, it's actually that simple. But I wish things were that simple, especially for procurement or supply chain management in the public space. We know that he spent in the public space in the previous year or whatever, it's over 1.3 trillion. It is probably has increased. So there's a lot of money going through. And we cannot take that for granted. And we know there are other areas that we are also scared to talk about. There are other areas that we need to have find spaces to speak about these areas of what is also these other areas that are making supply chain inefficient. Because you have said, we know what's going on. It's not rocket science. We all know where the issues are, what's causing those issues. Why are we not doing anything about it? There's a deeper issue that we need to discuss. That I see everyone is tiptoeing around it. Why are we not fixing the issues. That's why I brought up the issue of fear. We don't have a strong voice as supply chain management. We are not advocating for ourselves because there is an element of fear. So then that leads me to the professionalization that needs to come into the space where there are safe spaces where supply chain management professionals are able to go to and articulate safety, where there's safety, which I'm not fearing for my job, because that is a real issue. Yeah. If I'm fearing for my job, I'm going to keep quiet. I'm going to let things slide because at the end of the day, I need to survive. I need to put bread on the table for the kids. Where are those spaces? Supply chain doesn't have those spaces. Supply chain does not have those spaces where they can go and say, here is a professional body that I can write to, I can go to, I can express where my frustrations are, etc., etc. So the professionalization and having that body that is sitting in that space for supply chain management function is critical. And I know National Treasury has started the work, but National Treasury cannot do the work alone. There's a lot more other stakeholders that need to come into the space and to fast track. It is way overdue, way overdue.
Yeah, thank you, Phumzile.
Let me leave it at that for now.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I know I can hear your passion here. Now you are in mode operandi, and you want this to be done, you know, and it can be done. I can hear that from your voice as well. So maybe perhaps before we wrap up, we can just hear if there are any maybe contributions from our audience. I know that Mpumi has put on some comments as well to thank us for this initiative and stuff. And she has said she had to leave, I think for 11. So if there are any comments, or you can raise your hands if you want to talk, or you can write into the boxes, into the chat box there. You're welcome to do that. And this is recorded and it's on YouTube as well. So yeah, so I think Spusiso has a comment there, Phumzile. So maybe you'll take it after, yeah, you can say it now before we just say the wrap up in terms of what needs to go forward.
With Spusiso, great session. Supply chain is a strategic function. I believe these sessions can create environments where procurement teams can be proactive. Yeah, so I guess he is reiterating that we need spaces, we need more spaces, frequently so, for supply chain management officials to have a voice, and these and not just talk shops. Let's not just have talk shops. I think I'm exhausted with talk shops. We really need to have constructive discussions that we are able to then connect with areas where we are able to start delivering solutions. It doesn't matter how small the solutions are, how big, but we all need to start somewhere. And that's why we have EENSBS, to start with the skills development gap that we have identified as supply chain leaders. We need to start developing our skills. Our skills will be a propeller into having more constructive discussions going forward.
Yeah, and thank you about that. So also, as we wrap up, is that on the back to basics, we're saying we need to go back and define what it is, our ID, as Phumzile said. Who are we? What are we about? You know, we start there to say what is it, and what does it do, what's its importance, and we link it to the skills as well, and how to position it in there, and then we link into the skills. Who can actually practice the license to operate? And after that, if you are licensed, for example, also you're afraid of losing your license because you look at the lawyers, you look at their your accountants, as we speak about them, even your HR now, I think that's where they're going to. You look at your engineering as well, you have your engineering number. So if you don't do those accordingly, I think we want to take this and follow that that profession as well for it to be recognized as discipline, which I think it ticks the boxes, and we need that professional body. And I think as NS Business School, what we want to do as well is just to create that. So there will be a call, for example, for people that believe they are qualified, for us to actually take this movement properly, to debrief and get supply chain management, get this definition aligned. I mean, speak, I think, be partners with National Treasury, because on all these things that are happening, you know, everything starts with the government. You see the accounting with the auditing as well. There's an act, and there's that, you know, Public Auditors Act. With finance, that is the same. With engineering, that is the same. So we just need to do it so that government doesn't just go to consultants out there or in the world while we are here, and we know our space, we know what is happening in our country and as well as Africa. So for me, that's all I think that I'm saying. We have had those themes, what we need to do in terms of back to basics, and also our curricula as we're developing it at NS, it's actually to integrate that theory and practice, and just to look at those back to basics, to link, because it doesn't help for us to just learn for the theory part and not understand where we fall into this space. Because right now, as we look at it, people do supply chain management in the varsities and they think they fall into logistics. They don't look at the broader picture within the organization. They're unable to apply themselves as well. So we're looking at that to integrate that. Phumzile, I don't know if there's anything that you would like to add so that we don't keep our audience up.
No, I think we've hit our 11 o'clock mark. Yeah, I see. Umlingo, yes. We usually post the topic on our Facebook page a few days before, and so that, yes, you will be able to know, okay, this is our focus area for the week, and yes, we would love to have you guys to interact more, ask the questions. Let's have those tough conversations. Let's have those tough questions. So yes, do follow us on our Facebook page as well as our LinkedIn page, where we post every week on what the topics are for the week. Putty, yes, it was called purchasing function. Now you're talking fancy, you know, you're hearing fancy words, more procurement, more supply, more strategic sourcing. It was just purchasing. And it was there. So, but we have made strides. We have come a very, very long way. We are now really talking, I mean, with my interventions from SEPICS and SIPs. Those are stakeholders that have also assisted us to elevate discussions in supply chain to say no. It's not just purchasing. They are deeper and vast elements that we need to talk about. That those elements are quite strategic. So yes, so yeah, we have come a long way, but there's still a lot more work to be done.
Yeah, and I don't know who is Galaxy 6. I'm sorry to call you Galaxy 6. So they're saying thanks for welcoming me on this meeting. It was much more interesting, and we would like to make them so interesting so that we don't put up presentations. We want to talk about the real issues, not fluffy and touch on those. We've done those, and I hope that perhaps at the end there could be something that at the end of each year when we're done, we said this has moved and this is what has been achieved, so that there is actually, we walk the talk and there are actions, we can see some improvement in our profession.
Yes. So this is basically, we're starting some community of practice type of a setup where we want to talk to a particular issue, come up with certain interventions or certain solutions, and not just have a talk shop, so that by the end of the year we would have made certain strides. And we'd like to have you guys, because it cannot be done, we cannot do it this alone. So thank you guys, thank you for joining us. Busiso, Sibonelo, Team Lingo, Galaxy 6, we don't know who that is, and of course Dr. Ellsworth. Thank you for joining us, Ellsworth. Next time we would like to hear a bit more from the doctor's brain. So thank you very much, guys, for joining us. It was nice having you as we go deeper into the not so popular discussions in supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.